Hi. So what is the difference between voice and speech? So essentially to a microphone, for instance, they are no different from each other because they are just complex acoustic signal, right? So vibrations in the air. But somehow the brain can recognize there are meaningful linguistic information in the speech signal, right? And if you look at a speech signal, there are acoustic variations in the signal. Of course, this is a spectrogram which depicts the energy distribution across time, which is the horizontal dimension, and across frequency. As you can see, that certain features in this signal can signify different parts of the speech. For example, there are gaps in these energy bursts. So these gaps could be used, will be identified as the gaps between words, and the brain somehow can figure out, okay, the first energy burst is Joe, the second one is took, and father shoe, even though here the R vowel is actually stretched across a long period of time, so it's father. So it's a little bit irregular, but the brain can somehow still figure out, okay, that is a vowel. So the acoustic signal essentially will undergo a process called bottom-up process. So bottom-up signal are the signals in the environment. Okay, anything we see, the light, the vibrations in the air, these are all bottom-up signals, and they are very objective. And the only reason that you can recognize there's speech in it is because the brain actually can use its prior knowledge about this language and contextual information. For example, you might be talking about food in a restaurant, and even though the restaurant is very noisy, and you can still figure out what the other person is saying because your brain can predict more or less you're talking about some kind of food, and it will be able to search for the right words and extract the correct information from the speech signal, even though there is a lot of noise in the background. So the brain will undergo something called top-down processing, which is using the prior knowledge and context to predict what's in the signal and then to perceive what we want to perceive. You're given an acoustic signal, and the brain can use this information to predict what words and sentences are being said in the signal, and that's a top-down processing. And to illustrate that, to prove that the brain actually can predict, can hear what it wants to hear, I want to give you an example of so-called vocoded speech. So vocoded speech is a technique to remove the spectral information in actual speech recording. So this is a spectrogram of a normal sentence. Okay, you can see there is a lot of tiny variations in the speech. And a speech vocoding essentially is it divides the spectrogram into different frequency bands. And within each frequency band, it simply averages the energy across all the tiny frequency differences. So if you look at the spectrogram within each band, and they're very uniform vertically, as you can see, just very straight bands. And then they simply add all these 6 channels together to create a new signal, a modified signal. So this signal, if you compare the spectrogram on the right hand side to the one on the left, you can see that it's becoming very uniform, and there's not lots of dynamic changes in the signal anymore. So the resulting product actually sounds like some kind of energy bursts, and it's not very easy to understand what it's saying. Okay, so here's an example. Okay, do you get what it's saying? Probably not. I'll play it again. Okay, so if you haven't got it, then I'm going to review the answer. This is what it's saying. The dessert was put in the oven at the start of the meal. Okay, now you've heard it, and the brain knows what to look for in the signal. And I'll play this sound again. Exactly the same sound. Once you've heard it, you cannot unheard the sentence, right? It becomes so clear to us. Why? Because our brain have learned it, and then we know what to look for in the sentence. Okay, and that is the illustration of top-down processing in speech perception.